There are a lot of cases on the 1472-day or 15-year rebuild. It doesn't have to be always necessarily perfect. The 15-year rebuild, according to the Federal Railroad Administration Act of 1966, must at every 15 years, or every 1472 service days, whichever comes first, must the steam locomotive be undergoing a federal inspection by local railroad officials. It has to be stripped down to the boiler shell, must be given an ultrasound of thickness, and replace many parts of the locomotive, such as the running gear and maybe possibly the boiler itself. Since 1966, especially in the United States alone, there have been a number of cases of failed restoration attempts. Some restorations that put a lot of money into it and realize that the project is totally useless. Take Southern Pacific 2353 for example. When it operated for 5 years in a premature evaluation taken in the fall of 2000, many people believe that undergoing restoration means that it would just require patching of the steel. They can't be more wrong. Given the worst estimations, the locomotive had numerous cracks in the boiler shell and in the firebox. And with that, brought permanent display until further notice. For example, further notice until money is available, at least $500,000. Whenever cracks appear in the boiler shell that become too risky to weld, there are what they call lap seams. Lap seams cannot be tolerated by the FRA. Since the 2000s, Wisconsin, Colorado, Illinois, and New Jersey, there have been a number of cases of lap seam boilers. Boiler shells that appear to be almost 100 years old. Depending on how you fire them, always makes a difference. Some of the locomotives I'm going to explain to you have lap seam boilers that will require new ones to be FRA approved by the government. Besides Southern Pacific 2353, Zoo Lines 2645, Eli Thomas Lumber Company Shea No. 9, and recently Southern Railway 280 No. 401, which is now operational with a new boiler and converted to burnt oil. Many of the FRA standards don't realize that operating a steam locomotive is quite as hard as it seems. When all else fails, the fires must be sadly dropped for possibly the last time. Many locomotives have seen service over the years and have made progress in reevaluating their boiler codes. Every 15 years must the boiler tubes, which are fire tubes that are placed in the boiler, then swedged at one end and then sealed to prevent them from popping out, must they be replaced, and an ultrasound and an inspection of the boiler shell must be taken place. Parts like the crown sheet, throat sheet, the side sheets, which are all portions of the firebox, if they are deemed too thin by calculations, they must be replaced immediately. Take Spencer 604 for example. The back head has already been replaced along with the side sheet, and a portion of the mud ring has been replaced. The engine has already completed its firebox examination, but its boiler needs to be fixed to about $500,000 total. If there can be a way to raise over $355,000, which is likely to happen, people may see 604 operate in the near future. Other times, FRA can be a little funny with steam locomotives. Water treatment is the biggest solution of all locomotive problems. Take Graham County Shea 1925 for example. It didn't serve its 15 years. It operated from 1997 to the end of 2005 when it was prematurely taken out with worn out tubes that went out too soon, as expected. The tubes must be replaced and possibly a new firebox should be constructed. The boiler must be thoroughly cleaned out, primered and painted, and be checked for any other cracks in the portions of the areas of the boiler. Sometimes the restorations, if you have a ton of money, no matter how thoroughly you clean it, you actually give it the chance of wearing it too thin. Now, I'm not going to mention any other steam locomotives other than of a Pennsylvania locomotive. Pennsylvania's crown sheets were deemed too thin by FRA standards, and they automatically be replaced with 3/4 of an inch steel. Now, the Long Island has a history of thin crown sheets. Take engine 39 for example. Over $800,000 has been pumped into the locomotive's boiler alone, and is still seeking $1 million to complete it. Since 2005, the Strasburg Railroad in Pennsylvania has been doing a great job of restoring steam locomotives, both narrow and standard gauge equipment. Just firing a steam locomotive up without following the FRA regulations is never acceptable. You don't even know if there's water enough to prevent the fire from touching the steel. Every time water comes out of the boiler, you fire it up, you are risking the chance of a crown sheet failure and or a boiler explosion. Take the Gettysburg Railroad for example. They had no control over it. They were very inexperienced, and it was likely it could have been turned worse due to the stable construction. There is hopefully one day that FRA can get their act together, rebuild and repair steam locomotives like never before, and start rebuilding the locomotives from scratch.